On February 23, 2022, in the parking lot of a shopping mall in Yokohama, Japan, a young woman wearing nothing but her underwear suddenly began screaming hysterically in broad daylight. That woman was Ga Young Yuki, believed to be around 20 years old, who was yelling uncontrollably while dressed only in a bra and panties. Bystanders turned to look, unsure of what was happening. Then, without warning, she pulled out a hidden disposable razor and began slicing deep into her own arm. Panicked onlookers rushed to take the razor away and administer first aid. In the chaos, Yuki pointed at a man and cried out, "He hurt me. Arrest him," as she continued to scream in pain. Just minutes later, police and paramedics arrived on the scene. Yuki was transported to a hospital for treatment, while the man she accused was taken into custody for questioning. His name was Izawa Jun, 50 years old. Initially suspected to be a dangerous offender, a background check revealed that he was in fact the director of a psychiatric hospital in Kabuki-cho located in Shinjuku City, Tokyo. During his interrogation, Izawa claimed that he had been on a date with his girlfriend at the mall when she suddenly undressed and started screaming. He said he panicked and backed away. The police found no evidence that he had physically harmed her. Given his professional status and clean record, he was released after 24 hours of questioning. In a separate development, Yuki was admitted to the hospital in a highly unstable mental state. When her family arrived upon hearing the news, she reacted with suspicion, avoidance, and even pushed them away. Strangely enough, she insisted on returning to Izawa's home, referring to him as her boyfriend. The family tried to intervene, but to no avail. In the end, her mother reluctantly agreed, prioritizing Yuki's immediate mental stability, and accompanied her back to Izawa's residence. When they arrived, the front door opened to reveal Izawa calmly sipping brandy as though nothing had happened. Without a trace of concern, he poured himself another glass and casually invited Yuki's mother to sit and drink with him. The atmosphere was disturbingly calm, so much so that the earlier chaos in the parking lot now felt like a minor incident. But the question remained, what kind of doctor could remain so emotionally detached in a situation like this? To understand the real Izawa, we need to look back at the beginnings of his medical career. From a young age, he had studied relentlessly to enter medical school and eventually became a licensed specialist. After completing his residency, he opened Tokyo Clinic in the Nishi Azabu district of Tokyo in 2003. The clinic quickly gained notoriety, especially among drug addicts, for one controversial reason. Izawa was known for easily prescribing Rolin. To understand why prescribing Rolin made his clinic so popular, it's important to recognize what this medication actually is. Rolin is typically used to treat ADHD or depression, and it stimulates dopamine release very rapidly. However, it's highly addictive and extremely difficult to quit once a dependency forms. Because of this, Rolin is classified as a controlled substance in Japan and can only be obtained with a doctor's prescription. Knowing this all too well, Izawa turned Rolin into a money-making machine. Instead of conducting proper medical evaluations, he would listen to a few statements from patients and then immediately write prescriptions for anyone who asked. His lax approach quickly spread within the drug-addicted community, and his clinic became packed with patients every day, rapidly growing more profitable. Building on that success, just a year later in 2004, Izawa expanded his business and relocated the clinic to a busier district, Kabukicho, Shinjuku City, a nightlife hub in Tokyo. The area saw up to 300 visitors per day, and the demand for stimulants like Rolin skyrocketed in parallel. However, just 1 year after this expansion, his rising empire suffered an unexpected blow. During one consultation, Izawa got into a loud argument with a patient. The exact cause was never made clear, but the disagreement escalated into violence. News of the incident spread quickly across both the medical community and media. As a result, Izawa received a 3-year suspended prison sentence and had his medical license revoked for 2 years. But despite the court ruling, Isawa continued practicing as if nothing had happened. He blatantly ignored the suspension order and kept operating illegally. Just months before his suspension was set to expire, an anonymous tipster alerted police about his ongoing misconduct. Authorities launched a search of his clinic. The findings shocked the public. In 2007 alone, Isawa had prescribed 120,000 tablets of Rolin. This staggering figure far exceeded legal limits, and he was indicted for violating Japan's medical laws. After 7 years of appeals and legal wrangling, the court finally issued a verdict in 2014, finding him $3,620 and extending his medical license suspension for another 2 years. Even as he was entangled in legal proceedings, Isawa didn't stop. By this point, his motivations had shifted from money to predatory behavior toward female patients. During the trial period, he reportedly stalked and threatened several women who came to the clinic seeking prescriptions. These actions were soon uncovered, and Isawa was arrested again, this time additional charges related to harassment and patient intimidation. Shortly after the suspension period ended, Isawa returned to his old ways. In 2019, he reopened his clinic, this time drawing even more attention than before. The reason: a change in Japan's medical law, which restricted Rolin prescriptions only to those with severe insomnia. As a result, drug addicts saw Isawa's clinic as the last remaining place to get their fix. Exploiting the situation, Isawa began targeting young women addicted to the drug, approaching them privately. He would often imply that no other doctor would prescribe it, and if they wanted access, they would have to meet his personal demands. On one occasion, after becoming fixated on a particular woman, he used her health insurance information to obtain her home address and showed up at her door. Fortunately, the woman firmly rejected his proposition. He prescribed the woman 500 tablets of Rolin. With so much medication at her disposal, she began using it regularly and quickly developed a severe addiction. Within just 5 days, she had consumed more than 200 pills and had to be rushed to the hospital for emergency care. Around the same time, another case began to draw attention. In February 2021, a woman in her early 20s named Yuki arrived at a hospital. She had previously worked as a nurse, but was forced to quit after being sexually assaulted at her workplace. The trauma left her with serious psychological issues. She frequently felt as though she was being watched and experienced vivid hallucinations like insects crawling all over her body, rendering her unable to function normally. From that point on, she isolated herself in her room and cut off contact with the outside world. When her insomnia became unbearable, Yuki finally decided to seek help at a local clinic. During that search, she happened to walk into Tokyo Clinic. Having had formal training as a nurse, Yuki had some pharmacological knowledge. She specifically asked Isawa to prescribe a milder, less addictive sleep aid instead of Rolin. But instead of showing any interest in her condition, Isawa didn't ask a single question nor offer any consultation. He simply wrote the prescription. Ironically, that cold, detached manner made Yuki feel more comfortable. She didn't have to relive her trauma or talk about things she wasn't ready to share. That sense of emotional distance made it easier for her to return again and again. Not long after, Yuki contracted a sexually transmitted disease, STD. Though she could have visited a gynecology clinic, the thought of having to recount her previous assault was overwhelming. Instead, she opted to visit Isawa's psychiatric clinic, which was closer to home, and discreetly requested a prescription for antibiotics. It was during this visit that something deeply disturbing occurred. Isawa suddenly asked her to remove all of her clothing for a physical exam. Terrified, Yuki fled the clinic. But after calming down, she began to question whether what had happened was part of a legitimate medical procedure. What's more, she had started to feel a strange fondness for Isawa. Even though they had only met a few times, Yuki found herself happy to be around him and looked forward to their conversations. That sentiment led her to return to the clinic. From that point forward, their relationship quickly became more personal. Despite the significant age gap, the two entered into a romantic relationship. Eventually, Yuki began staying at Aisawa's house around 3 days a week. At first, things seemed peaceful, but over time, Aisawa began demanding sex more frequently, insisting that she never use contraception. What made it even more troubling was that he wasn't single. He was still in the process of divorcing his wife and had 2 children. Meanwhile, Yuki was only 20 years old and had no interest in getting involved in such a complicated situation. She did her best to avoid pregnancy. While Yuki was still hesitant and trying to maintain some distance, Aisawa began emotionally manipulating her. He repeatedly emphasized the love between them, made promises about marriage and having children. Over time, Yuki's guard began to drop and she gradually fell under his control. Due to their significant age and life experience gap, she came to believe that what Aisawa said made sense and she followed his lead. But for Aisawa, that still wasn't enough. In order to gain full control over Yuki, he began serving her a cocktail drink every night. Unbeknownst to her, it contained both Rolin and aripiprazole, two medications typically prescribed to patients with schizophrenia. While aripiprazole isn't as addictive as narcotics, regular use by someone suffering from emotional trauma like Yuki can severely impair cognitive function, dull emotional responses, and disrupt normal behavioral control. Taking advantage of Yuki's increasingly fragile mental state, Aisawa quietly increased the dosage, gradually pushing her into a condition of psychological and physical exhaustion over a span of 5 months. Once a former nurse with exposure to the dangers of drugs, Yuki was now unable to function normally. Even her family began to notice dramatic changes in her demeanor. Most tellingly, her condition always worsened after returning from Aisawa's house. By mid-September, a serious incident occurred. That day, Yuki had plans to meet up with a friend after a long period of isolation. Before leaving, she told Awa that she couldn't stay the night. He appeared slightly disappointed but remained calm. Just as she was stepping out the door, he handed her a glass of water, gently suggesting she drink it before leaving. Moments after drinking it, Yuki suddenly lost consciousness and collapsed to the floor. Meanwhile, the friend, growing increasingly worried after waiting a long time with no word, began calling Yuki repeatedly. Dozens of missed calls went unanswered. Eventually, someone picked up, but it wasn't Yuki, it was Awa. He gave a short response, "Yuki is sleeping at my place. You can come pick her up," sensing something was very wrong. The friend rushed to Aisawa's house by taxi. When she arrived, she was horrified to find Yuki lying unconscious in the middle of the living room, completely undressed, eyes rolled back and unresponsive. Despite calling her name and gently shaking her, Yuki remained unconscious. Fearing for her friend's safety, she quickly dressed her, carried her on her back, and took her home that same night. After being brought home, Yuki woke up in a dayside, confused and unable to understand how she had ended up there. While still trying to piece together what had happened, her phone suddenly rang. It was Aisawa screaming at her to return immediately. It was the first time Yuki had ever heard him so enraged. Not remembering exactly what had happened and assuming she must have done something wrong, she panicked and hurried back to his house. Seeing Yuki's disoriented state and abnormal behavior, the friend could no longer stay silent. She reached out to Yuki's parents, urgently pleading that they bring her home as soon as possible before things spiraled any further out of control. In response to the friend's plea, Yuki's parents immediately went to Aisawa's home and rang the doorbell. Although it was obvious someone was inside, no one came to answer. As they stood there unsure of what to do next, the door suddenly swung open and Yuki was shoved out. She stumbled forward, unsteady on her feet, as if she had been forcibly expelled. Her family was stunned and confused by what they were witnessing. What alarmed them even more was that Yuki's condition had deteriorated significantly. Her pupils were dilated, and although her eyes were open, she seemed completely unconscious, like a shell of herself. Without hesitation, her father went straight to the local police station and filed an official complaint stating his daughter had been harmed. But all of their efforts were crushed just one day later when Yuki herself arrived at the station and withdrew the complaint. When asked why, she simply replied, "Because I still love Isawa." This response deeply concerned her friend, who then began to investigate Isawa and uncovered disturbing information. A history of disciplinary action for overprescribing Rollin, a past involving violent behavior and incidents of stalking. After gathering enough evidence, she showed everything to Yuki and urged her to end the relationship immediately. Her family also pleaded with her, but by then Yuki was no longer listening to anyone. A few weeks later, Yuki moved out of her family home to live with Isawa. During the day, she assisted at his clinic, but behind closed doors, she entered a vicious cycle of violence and control. Isawa dictated her every move, and if she resisted even slightly, he would strike her with his fists or jab her with the tip of an umbrella. The abuse didn't stop there. It escalated to even more brutal acts. Isawa began forcing her to soak in ice-cold bathtubs, holding her head underwater until she nearly passed out. He even constructed a crude torture device made from plastic panels and rubber cords to clamp different parts of her body like a twisted form of medieval punishment. Beyond physical violence, Isawa controlled her through distorted sexual demands. He frequently took male enhancement drugs and forced Yuki into sex multiple times a day, regardless of her exhaustion or health. Despite being pushed to the brink, both mentally and physically, Yuki did not resist. Instead, she convinced herself that everything Isawa did was somehow out of love and concern. Meanwhile, Isawa himself was spiraling into psychological chaos. Addicted to drugs, he became increasingly paranoid. At times, he would seal off every window and crack in the house, muttering that someone was watching them. On one occasion, he filled the bathtub with scalding water, sat in it fully clothed, and screamed uncontrollably. Living under such constant pressure, Yuki's strength finally gave out. One day, feeling something was off, she secretly checked his phone and discovered he was still in contact with multiple women despite living with her. The betrayal broke her completely. In a moment of despair, Yuki swallowed 200 sleeping pills. When she woke up still alive, she took another 100 pills the following day before collapsing and losing consciousness. Instead of helping, Isawa stood by as if none of it concerned him, watching Yuki's collapse like it was a performance. He even filmed the scene as though observing a stage play. It wasn't until days later, when Yuki was on the verge of death, that he finally called 119 for emergency assistance without making any effort to bring her to the hospital himself. When paramedics arrived, they discovered that in addition to an overdose of sleeping pills, her body was covered in bruises and dangerously emaciated. They immediately contacted her family. Upon receiving the news, Yuki's father called Isawa in a rage. But instead of showing any remorse, Isawa responded with outrageous insults and open hostility. He blamed Yuki entirely, accusing her of adjusting her own medication dosage and then viciously bred her entire family. Despite enduring such horrific abuse, Yuki returned to Isawa's house as if nothing had happened. Over the following days, she became emotionally and physically depleted and began cutting her own arms as a way to release her emotional pain. It was during this mentally fragile period that the incident at the shopping mall parking lot on February 23rd occurred. That day, the two of them visited a shopping mall and acted like any normal couple. But in the parking lot, Isawa suddenly pointed to a piece of trash on the ground and ordered Yuki to pick it up. Wearing a short skirt and high heels, she hesitated awkwardly and he exploded in anger, berating her outfit and then demanding she strip off all her clothes right there in public. Crushed by prolonged psychological pressure, Yuki no longer had the will to resist. She complied with his order, removing all her clothing until she was left only in her underwear. Isawa stared at her in silence, then turned and walked away. Instead of shame, Yuki was consumed by terror, the fear of abandonment. In a panic, she began screaming and pulled out a razor from her bag, slashing her own arm. Still shaken from that trauma, Yuki faced yet another crisis just 3 days later on February 26th. When she attempted to call a male acquaintance for work-related matters, Isawa flew into a jealous rage, accusing her of contacting an ex-boyfriend and violently attacked her. His fury escalated into another session of torture using the same clamping method he had used before. The unhealed wounds burst open, causing blood and pus to flow uncontrollably. It was during this ordeal that Yuki, for the first time, feared she might actually die. In a moment of desperation, she fought back. Her screams and the sounds of the struggle were so loud that neighbors called the police. When officers arrived, they immediately transported Yuki to the hospital and searched the apartment. There they discovered 280 milligrams of illegal drugs hidden in a cabinet. Though Isawa denied everything, he was arrested on the spot for violating Japan's Narcotics Control Act. While Yuki was receiving treatment in the hospital, she was dealt a devastating blow. Her younger sister, the person she loved most, had committed suicide. The girl had been deeply worried for Yuki's safety and just before her death had secretly reached out to Isawa, pleading with him to take better care of her sister. Instead of showing compassion, Isawa heartlessly boasted that he had punished Yuki for disobedience with a smug, proud look on his face as though bragging about a conquest. The devastating loss completely shattered Yuki. She believed it was her fault that her younger sister had chosen such a tragic end, and the overwhelming guilt became unbearable. In the depths of that emotional torment, she finally made the decision to cut all ties with the Isawa. From that moment on, Yuki resolved to take action and end the nightmare. On March 28th, she filed a formal report accusing Isawa of abuse. Immediately afterward, authorities raided Tokyo Clinic and numerous female patients came forward to accuse the doctor of misconduct. The truth began to unfold: reckless drug prescriptions, physical assault, and coerced use of illegal substances. By February 2023, the case was officially brought to trial. In court, Isawa stubbornly denied all charges. He claimed that Yuki and the other women were mentally unstable patients and that their accusations were delusional fabrications. He insisted that he had done nothing more than fulfill his medical duties, that all prescriptions were legal, and that no abuse had occurred. Despite this, the prosecution faced significant challenges due to the lack of surveillance cameras in the clinic. With no physical evidence beyond victim testimonies and Isawa denying all wrongdoing, the trial gradually tilted in his favor. In the end, the court acknowledged only the injuries inflicted on Yuki and sentenced Isawa to 2 years and 4 months in prison. As the verdict was read, Yuki's father broke down in tears. Unable to contain his anguish, he told reporters that he had lost both of his daughters because of Isawa, one to death, the other to trauma and drug addiction. Refusing to remain silent, he went public with their story, sharing it with the media to expose the full truth. As the story spread, outrage erupted across Japan, with many questioning the lenient sentence and why Isawa still hadn't lost his medical license. Even after numerous public protests and media pressure following the trial, Isawa is now just months away from completing his prison sentence and shockingly still has the legal right to reopen his clinic. If that happens, the emergence of new victims is not only possible, it's likely because in reality, Japanese society has yet to fully acknowledge the severity of Isawa's crimes. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.